Hello, everyone. This is Scott Benjamin with Fun Spot Manufacturing, and this is Tuesday Town Hall, the Adventure Park podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here with us. I have some special guests, Jeff and Shaunti Feldhahn. Jeff and Shaunti, welcome.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, it sure is.
So Jeff and Shaunti and I and our families go way back. Jeff and Shaunti are authors and speakers in the relationship space, primarily around men's and women's issues and marriages, and have spent a lot of time together in different and various circumstances. So excited to be able to talk with you guys about relationships today. So thanks for taking the time to be with me.
Our pleasure.
Totally.
Yeah. So I wanted to kick off with a story as we talk about relationships. And the reason I want to talk about relationships on this episode is, one of the things we've said for months and months is that we want to add value to our listeners. And we've added value in talking about everything from how do you clean in COVID to what are some tips and tricks for dealing with your staff and how to hire, and lots of very practical in the park types of things. But one of the things that I'm seeing more and more as I see posts on LinkedIn is talking about mental health, talking about relational health. And so I think we're adding value by talking about this. And a book I read many years ago was called Refrigerator Rights. And the gist of this book, Refrigerator Rights, is that back in the day, we'll say maybe our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, people drove into their carport, and then they would sit on their front porch and they'd drink tea and they'd talk and they'd visit with the people that walk by. And perhaps they lived in a community where their aunts and uncles and cousins or grandparents lived. So there was lots of community happening outside and around the home. Well, today we drive into our garage door, we close the garage door, we go through our house, grab a drink, go to the back porch, and we sit alone with our spouse. And so where in the past we had other relationships that would help us deal with the stresses of the day, we now in our back porch kind of put that primary stress on our spouse that was meant to be spread out. And so I think we're in a very unique situation today, because whether we want to be that way or not, even if we want it to be more front porch social, we can't be. And so as you guys research and talk to lots of different people, what are you seeing and hearing that is going on with relationships in this COVID time?
Well, interestingly, there's some ups and downs, but there's more ups than you might think. It's just a very different season with some really unique challenges. One of the things that obviously everybody knows is that if you've got tensions, if you've got things that were bugging you before COVID, they're probably bugging you more now, because you've been pressured, you've been thrown together. And that's one of those you sink or swim kind of situations where you really have to figure out how to make this work or not. And the good news, though, is that for most people, they're finding that being thrown together for many more hours a day is actually building up their friendship with each other as spouses. And because they're spending more time together. And so there's a lot more literally just time for connection. And that's actually one of the things that we found in one of our previous research projects, which I think we did a focus group with you and Patty and some other friends at some point for our study on like really happy marriages, like what are they doing differently? And we found at the time, and this was about 5-6 years ago, we found that one of the factors, is kind of sneaky factor that really matters, is literally just hanging out with your spouse instead of being all over the place.
Yeah. Now, I don't know your listeners, Scott, but if they're like I was or my family was, because I've been involved in small business life since I was 18 years old in family businesses. And the spouses worked in the business alongside each other. And so we were already spending a lot of time together. And that posed, significant challenges. And then if you layer on, like right now, with kind of the economic downturn and uncertainty, the pressures really are significant on those couples. And I think over the research that we've done over the years, there are some simple things that can be applied, to help folks navigate those kind of constant
seasons.
interactions and challenges.
Well, especially today, because like we have good friends who own a park, and it's when you've had to maybe lay off some people because there just isn't demand or things have been closed. I mean, the spouse and sometimes the
Has to
kids
step in.
they're getting pressed into service in lieu of a paid employee. And so, yeah, you do have more family time. It's so crucial to be intentional about making that good time rather than time that adds to the pressure.
Let's talk a little bit and kind of dig into that intentionality. What are some things that you could suggest? You know, you guys are a small business. You
we're
walk
the
around in the
same.
house together all day,
Yeah.
and so what are some kind of intentional things that you guys do to make sure that you're keeping the air clear?
Yeah, there's. I think we can jump into a few pieces of the research that what we found of things that the happiest couples have done in their relationships.
Mhm.
But at least for us, and this is not researched, it's anecdotal,
This is
and it's what's
experience.
worked in our lives.
Mhm.
We both need to feel like we're winning in a certain area, and that we have a level of responsibility in a particular area. So Shaunti may be the one who handles these tasks, these
Like,
things that need to get done.
I do specific research planning.
Correct.
Yeah.
And those she is so great at, and I don't want to be involved in it. And I let her run with it. And I have other tasks and responsibilities in the way that we try to move things forward. The challenge is when we begin to look over the shoulder of the other.
He's trying really hard not to look at me right now, Scott, because he does not ever move over into my lane. But unfortunately, I have a tendency to move over into his. Well, what about this? Well, why did you set up the video that way?
Right.
And so honestly, when that happens, and it's going to happen whenever couples work together, it's what you do then that's the key, because feelings are going to get hurt.
Mm.
And I'm not always the poster child for how to handle it well. But we've researched this, and theoretically, I know what I'm supposed to do.
Yes.
So why don't you talk a little bit
what
about
you're supposed to do?
What do the happiest couples do?
The most important one for that, and actually really the most important one overall in general, is it's really, really crucial to believe the best of your spouse's intentions towards you. Because you could either go, and do you mind if I use you as an example?
We've got plenty of them, so go ahead.
Well, no, I'm thinking of the one that we just said. Like, you don't try to interfere in the research lane, right? Like me setting up focus groups or whatever, but I'm always peering over your shoulder in, well, why did you do the video that way or whatever, okay? And Jeff could say, she just doesn't trust me.
Oh, don't. She's making me out to be better that I could say that. I actually do say that. Sometimes it doesn't come out in actual words, but it is something that is at risk to play out over and over again in my head. So keep going.
Well, I think you're giving yourself a bad rap here, because I think you're handling it great. But he could say, she just doesn't trust me, which is believing the worst of your spouse's intentions towards you. Or you can flip it, and this is usually the case, by the way, because she doesn't trust me, or he doesn't, love me, he doesn't care about me. You're believing these things that are like, basically, my spouse doesn't care about me, and that's almost always not true. I mean, there's a tiny, tiny fraction where that is true, but the vast majority of the time, like 99% plus,
the vast majority of couples,
you do absolutely care about the other person. You do trust them. You do appreciate them. You do love them, whatever the adjective is. So the switch is instead of saying, she just doesn't trust me, it's probably a better and healthier thing for Jeff to go, she's just trying to help. She's not trying to criticize. She feels like she's looking over my shoulder. She doesn't see it that way. Like for me, I will literally see something and my little analyst brain gets turned on and I get curious.
Right.
And I start saying, well, why this? And what about this? And did we think about this? And he's like, I thought about this for 5 days before I did it. Like, stop trying to tell me I don't micromanage or tell me I don't know what I'm doing. And so for me, I could get upset and say, he doesn't care. He wants to keep me out. He doesn't want my input. He doesn't value my opinion. All of that is wrong too. And so instead, I have to say, of course he cares. Like, he took over this whole huge business line in our business in order to free me up to do these other things. Of course he cares. It is literally believing the best of your spouse's intentions and having to sort of get that mental map constantly running in your brain.
Yeah, and that believing the best, key for a marriage relationship and success there. And I'm going to start to dive down into my kind of coaching side. And
oh gosh,
people know that I do marriage coaching. They've heard that. If they've dug into my LinkedIn profile, they see that that's one of the things that I do. But I, parlaying that into operating a small business, there's just so many things that work there as well. Working with not only your spouse, if they're in the business with you, or you're just at home with them doing your two different works together, it's believing the best when you're communicating with your staff and with your employees. And Jeff and I were talking a little bit about how some of these things really can be taught into your staff, and you learn them as a young person. It's just such a great opportunity for them to grow and to have things that we didn't know, and we just kind of made it and faked it till we made it, and sometimes we still do that. But for me, believing the best, or I talk about assuming goodwill, or just in the absence of having information, making up a good story versus a bad story. So
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. No, that's it's certainly with our spouse, we should be able to do this. I mean, because we have history. Now, a lot of folks sometimes have history on the negative side of things. And that's where our challenge of what we allow our minds to really dwell on. One of the things that we learned, that couples who really are successful in their marriage, they keep score. And, we've always heard that, it's a bad thing to keep score in your relationship. Well, the fact is, it's a bad thing to keep score of all the negative things that your spouse has done. What they do, these happy couples, they actually kept score of the good things. And so they would make mental lists. And when Shaunti would come or something she would do or say that really chapped me, and I would move into my mental, kind of arithmetic of all the things that she's done wrong, and this is just one more indication of it, I would have to stop myself, and I'd force myself to remember all of the good things, the things that she does that, I oftentimes take for granted. And as I am going through that list, the heat and the emotion that I'm feeling really dissipates. And for all of us, I'll tell you, small business person, big business person, couples not in business together, we want peace in our lives. We want happiness in our lives. And if you're going to be venting and being angry, that's the opposite of peace. And if there are things that you can do, tips that you can take, apply them, do them. We want to be happy.
Yeah.
Can I mention the venting thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So we think of venting as being a good thing. We've sort of, all of us, including me, we've all sort of had this long-standing cultural belief that it's better to let a little steam out of the kettle, right? So that it doesn't explode. And I was actually doing an event on mental health. How can you improve your mental health at a time like this for a large state university? And of course, it was a virtual event. Right. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to poll these students. These are all 20, 21-year-olds who were on the virtual event. And I said, okay, here's a scenario about something that's driving you nuts. Now, I wasn't using a spouse scenario. Obviously, these are college students, but I said, here's a scenario of something that's driving you nuts. You're not being treated right, or something happened that's not fair. what is the healthiest way of handling it? And 88% of the students chose that the healthiest way of handling it was to let a little of the frustration out, to vent a little bit so you don't explode. And it turns out that that is entirely inaccurate neurologically. Neuroscientists have found that actually that's a myth. And that what happens is that when you're frustrated with your spouse and you vent to them or to a friend, like, I can't believe what my husband did or whatever, or you throw out some frustration on social media, you're expressing discontent, whatever it is, that what happens is you're actually activating this interconnected anger system in the brain. And that a better analogy is that you're actually not venting. It turns out the analogy is that you're turning up the heat under the pot. You're getting more and more and more frustrated with this person, in this case, your spouse. And so, because I mean, think about it. Like, if you're irritated with someone and you tell them you're irritated, and you maybe tell somebody else you're irritated, are you going to be more or less irritated?
Yeah.
Like, everybody knows the answer to that, right?
Yeah.
So what the neuroscientists have found is that it makes all the difference if you will basically just refuse to complain about those things and instead, like, redirect your thoughts. Maybe, like Jeff was saying, think about something good your spouse does. Or, even if you're just frustrated and just want to be mad, just don't express it right now. And what happens is that is sort of like taking the pot off the burner entirely. And it's like putting the lid on, and your steam, so to speak, your anger, your frustration just kind of evaporates.
Yeah. So believe the best, keep score on all the best things, and
all the
use
good
that
things
to your advantage to pull the kettle off the steam, off the burner, if you will, and to kind of lessen that frustration level that could come. So what's one more?
Well, another one that is sort of related to all of these, because they're all kind of intertwined, is it's really easy for us to say, look, I'm just being honest. I'm just telling it like it is, right? Like, my spouse is messing up, right? Like, that was terrible signage, or that was a terrible way of handling the social media post about whatever is going on with the park or whatever.
Right.
And we don't realize that it's fine to be honest, but the concept of being brutally honest is really destructive.
I agree.
And instead, there is a really profound thing that happens when you find a way to speak to one another that is more kind with your spouse and more considerate of how they might be feeling about what you're saying, even than you would with anybody else. Because I think every entrepreneur knows the feeling of, I realized I would speak to my staff way, way more considerately. I need to keep them.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure they don't quit, right? I want them to be happy. And so I'm super careful about how to speak to them. And then I'll say something to him, rolling my eyes, and like, why am I not being most considerate of him?
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. That is an aspect of emotional maturity, when you can treat those that are closest to us the way we would treat, acquaintances.
Yeah. One of the things in that was revelatory for me in the research that we did was that, we're talking for couples working together, men and women working together, which, it's fraught with peril because we are such different species.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, recognizing that there are these differences between us gender wise, most of the research that we've done oftentimes doesn't necessarily correlate, into gender things, when,
everybody likes being considered.
Yes.
And being affirmed.
In some of them, they really were specific to gender. And one was the things that we're afraid of. For us as guys, we're just afraid, gut level tension and concerns and worries than maybe our wives have at a gut level worry and
No,
fear.
it's just different.
It's
though.
just different.
Well, like for you as a guy, and this is the case with, depending on the survey, it was between 70 and 75% of men, depending on which survey that we did. But for the vast majority of men, the big question underneath the surface that often the wife, even of an entrepreneur, doesn't get, is this deep feeling like, am I going to be enough to provide for my family? Like this deep question.
To keep us from pitching over the cliff.
Yeah.
Because there are perils all around, and I need to be focused super, super carefully and strategically on our business and our ability to keep cash flow in and to keep these things moving. And, you know, we think in our guy mind that I'm doing this, and certainly she will see that this is how I'm showing her I love her and our family, because I'm keeping us afloat, and I need to be working and worrying about this stuff all the time.
And women, interestingly, statistically, women are just as likely to be worrying about money from a technical standpoint as men are. That's what we found numerically. And yet from a fear perspective, the cliff that we're worried about pitching over isn't so much, am I going to be able to provide for the family? Like that's more of a, we'll figure it out kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But the cliff, so to speak, that women see statistically more likely, and again, it's 70 to 75% ish, is this, like, are we okay? You're working like 80 hours a week, you're stressed, you've got the black cloud of doom following around the head, around the house. And the answer to, are we okay right now, is no. And that takes up an overwhelming amount of kind of the emotional energy and the worry about pitching over that cliff. And part of the thing that I think guys don't really realize is it's very hard for a woman in general to turn that off. For a guy, unless ironically it's about providing, you can turn off some of these other concerns. I'll think about that later. Like right before we started this podcast, we got this tearful call from our daughter. And you know, you've known her for years, and she's a junior in college. She's great. She's in an engineering program, and it's really tough. And she's worried about losing her scholarship. And she just called us in tears about whether she was going to be able to do this quiz well. Right. And right now, as we're sitting here talking, because that's my cliff of, is everybody okay? And now I'm like, no, that's literally like an open window on a computer in my head right now as we're talking.
And I'm not.
And he's like, she'll be fine.
I love her. She's an amazing daughter.
You both have the same information, but you're processing
exactly right.
And that's one of the big differences that I think a lot of husbands and wives in entrepreneurial ventures together don't realize about each other. For the woman to realize, he literally is truly worried that you might pitch over the cliff and have to close everything down, declare bankruptcy. You will leave him, the glaciers will melt, and the world will stop spinning on its axis. Because he couldn't.
I'm in touch with that emotion.
Because he couldn't make the business work. Like that's literally in his head. Where the wife is going, what? Like, no, that is really how he feels. And for him to realize that she is so worried about you, about the family, about whether we're okay because you're grumpy and you're snapping and, you know, you're complaining about something that's going on with the business, and you feel distant because you're working all these extra hours because you're trying to do the job of 3 people. And she's truly worried about whether you guys are okay, and about whether or not you're going to survive this, or whether this is the beginning of things that might be going really wrong between the 2 of you, and whether suddenly you're going to somehow say, you know, I just don't feel the same way about you that I did before. And he's like, really? Like, why would you, what? Like, you ever think that? Right. And again, these aren't conscious thoughts. They're down under the surface, but they're real.
Yeah. And bringing them up and communicating about them.
And reassuring.
Just
each other.
Absolutely.
I mean, it has made all the difference.
A perfect example. Exactly. Shaunti's right. When we lived in New York and I was working at a big firm, she was working on Wall Street, And we had an opportunity to move to another location, and we were kind of going to be in business together in it. There's going to be a lot of overlap. We were super excited. It sounded like just our dream job, dream location, all of these things. And at the 11th hour, it all fell apart.
Mm.
And I then started to spin down with I hate my job, but I'm stuck. And I'm going to be here because we have all of this student loan debt, because we're going to have a family. I'm going to have all of these responsibilities, all of these things. I'm spinning down. And she looks at me and says, look, I want you to know, if we left all of this tomorrow and moved to Iowa, and you bought a small plot of land and we became farmers for the rest of our life, not saying that is the worst thing that you can do,
Right.
But if that's what we were going to do with our life, but as long as we were together, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
And that totally transformed my belief in who I was and who I believed we were and what we could possibly do together.
All by me, without realizing how much that was going to free him up, just literally trying to express what most women actually think.
Yeah.
Which is, I care about you and us more than anything that you or we could provide. Yeah. And that's an incredibly important thing for a lot of wives to be able to articulate to their husbands.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I know we're going to bump up against some time. I know your daughter may call back, and I don't want to reopen that window. But
okay.
In the few minutes that we have, you have a book that you wrote called The Kindness Challenge that has gotten quite a bit of traction, and just wanted to. I think it's important because I think we're in an environment, socially, politically, economically, health-wise, where being kind is just not necessarily the tall. It's a tall order, and I don't know that everybody is taking advantage of the opportunity to be kind. So talk to us, briefly about the Kindness Challenge and what you're doing with the book.
Do you want me to
do it?
Okay, so the Kindness Challenge was based on a study that we did 3-4 years ago, and it was trying to figure out how can you improve any relationship in your life. It doesn't matter whether it's spouses, partners, whether it's your kids, maybe your mother-in-law is driving you nuts, like whatever it is, colleagues, your business partner, whatever that is. It turns out that there's actually a really, really simple, but really, really profound way of addressing that. And so we called this the 30-Day Kindness Challenge. And you do 3 things for 30 days. You pick the person you're going to do it for. So let's just say in this case, it's your spouse. You're in business together, you own a park together or whatever. And I'm going to encourage whoever's listening to the podcast, if you're listening to this on your own, don't necessarily tell your spouse you're going to do this for them. Like, just do it and see what happens. But you do 3 things for 30 days. First, you don't say anything negative about them, either to them or about them to somebody else.
That's right.
And that's often where we sabotage ourselves, right? Because I can be polite to Jeff, but if I'm going to my girlfriends and I'm like, you wouldn't believe what he did, I actually don't realize I'm sabotaging how I feel about him. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. Second thing, every day for 30 days, is to find one thing that you can sincerely praise, sincerely affirm about the person. And you tell them that, and you tell somebody else. So you're doing that every day for 30 days. And then you do a small action of kindness or generosity every day as well. And those 3 things are really like almost simplistic seeming, but statistically, when we did these pre and post surveys and did outcome-based analysis, it was transformational. 89% of relationships improved, because what you're doing is you're retraining yourself. And it candidly, the biggest benefit, you're improving the relationship, but what you're going to see, honestly, is the biggest benefit is you're completely changing you.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. I mean, you just think about habits and all the time that it takes, and just committing to a 30-day challenge to improve your primary relationship with your spouse, but if that's a coworker, a friend, like you said, a mother-in-law. I mean, there are so many relationships that can be conflicted within our lives, but, for the context of what we're talking about now, our spouses, I can't encourage people more than to take a look. And I'll put some links to your material in our show notes and in the email that we'll send out with this podcast episode, so people can do a little more research and digging into to your work. And so guys, I could go on and on. We could talk for a few more episodes, but I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the time you've taken to just kind of share a little bit about the research that you've done around relationships and men and women, and appreciate and really love you guys so much. So
thanks, Scott. And most of the research has been applied by us. We're still applying some. So
yes.
It's born out of hard years and hard work.
And every now and then these friends of ours called Scott and Patty Benjamin will put their hands on our shoulders and say, there's a book you need to read.
So thank you.
You catch us when we don't apply it.
For all these years. Thank you.
Same. And that's, going back to my original story, the idea that, we weren't meant to put the stresses of everyday life on our primary relationships only. Having those additional relationships, community in our lives is so important. And so I'll leave with just an encouragement to seeking out and connecting in community to those that are listening. So Jeff and Shaunti, thanks again. Again, thank you for listening. Those that are tuning in, whether you're watching or listening on Apple or Spotify, I encourage you to subscribe, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.